Good morning, church. Today's scripture reading comes from Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 6. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." Lent is a season of preparation for the resurrection of Jesus. We remember the 40 days of Jesus in the wilderness through prayer and fasting. Each week, we will be extinguishing one candle to signify the journey towards Easter.
All right. Well, good morning and welcome again. Doing a sort of Advent in reverse over here. My name is Matt. I think I know everyone in here, but if you're watching online and I don't know you, I'm Matt. Now you know me. As Laura said, we're beginning Lent, this 40-day journey to the cross. And as she said, it's 40 days. It symbolizes those 40 years that the Israelites wandered in the desert, and then where Jesus embodied those 40 years in 40 days in the desert, fasting. And 40 is that number in the Bible that symbolizes an uncomfortably long time. Okay, if you see 40, it means it's too long. And it often is an in-between time, right? Like with the Israelites, they were no longer slaves in Egypt, but they weren't yet settled in the Promised Land. They were in between. And Lent is often a time of intentional reflection and repentance, where we turn and return back to Jesus and his ways. And for this season of Lent, we'll be leaning into the theme of grief. Holy grief. Sounds fun, right? Tell all your friends. I mean, why grief and why now? Well, first, I think I know many of us, have much to grieve. But we don't necessarily know how to do it. For some of us, this is recent loss happening in real time or not too far in the past. We've experienced the loss of loved ones. We've come to a realization of unmet longings, things that aren't going to work out, dreams that maybe won't happen. Or maybe we need to grieve the political reality of our country right now. Maybe we need to grieve the environmental reality of our planet right now. So for some, it's very present. But for others, it's about an accumulation of things. An accumulation of things that we finally realize we need to deal with, or it's going to keep dealing with us. You'll hear me name this guy, Francis Weller, a lot. He just has all these little great quotes. Francis Weller calls this sort of thing the scattered shards of unattended grief, the pieces of unwept loss, and the shavings of old wounds swept into the corner. So for some of us, again, grief is going to be very obvious. Gosh, I lost this person or this thing or this job, and I need to grieve better. And for others, it's these little things that we maybe didn't realize are adding on top of each other and compiling and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And for us here, I also want to invite you to grieve the realities of a changing church. Perhaps your close friends have stopped worshiping with us. Some of mine have. That's worth grieving. Perhaps you feel sadness that we have voted that we are going to change the name. Maybe you have so many fond and meaningful memories that happened, not just at church, but at First Free. Marriages, baptisms, funerals. And it just won't feel the same with a different name. That's worth grieving. Perhaps your heart aches because this church just isn't what it once was. You miss when the sanctuary was full. You have to get here early to find a seat, and they actually started on time. Or when there was 2 services, right? Or when we had this ministry or that ministry. Or we supported that partnership or that partnership. Really good things that have had to change. And that's worth grieving. The fear, the sadness, any disorientation you may be feeling in all this change is valid, and it makes total sense. Why grief, and why now? First, because we have much to grieve, and we are in a culture that doesn't facilitate us grieving well. But second, because growing closer to Jesus means growing closer to grief. If we want to be acquainted with Jesus, that means becoming familiar with the man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. Jesus was not a stranger to grieving. We have 2 accounts in our Gospels of him straight up weeping over a loss of a friend, Lazarus, and weeping over a city, Jerusalem. We have stories of Jesus sweating blood because he's in agonizing prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. We have a story of Jesus expressing his deep feeling of forsakenness on the cross. In the Gospels, most of the men end up abandoning Jesus, at least for a short period, in his hour of suffering. You know who don't? Girl power. The women, especially Mary, his mother. She's there. And staying near Jesus means that Mary's soul is pierced with the sword of sorrow. That's prophesied over her when Jesus is just a baby, and then it comes to fruition. Mary knows the unthinkable. She knows what it's like to lose a child. This is why the Pietà is our artwork for this season, this famous sculpture of Michelangelo's. It's not actually that color. I did change it a little bit. But that sculpture of Mary holding Jesus in her arms, looking down on him. It's become a great theme in much art. You can find contemporary renditions. If Mary is a symbol for us as the one who was present to Jesus, committed to him, unwilling to abandon him, then she shows us that our commitment to Jesus will mean our souls too will be pierced by the sword of sorrow. Today we read the first section of the Sermon on the Mount. It included the first 4 Beatitudes. And Jason Miller, he writes about these Beatitudes, and he helps to give a little bit of the historical context to understand what Jesus is getting at. He says, the ancient Greeks at that time, they imagined that their gods experienced the best kind of life. They were up in the clouds, right, or up on Mount Olympus. And they were up there living their best life. And down here was the physical world, where humans were, matter was, decay, chaos. Far away from them. This experience of being up in the clouds, far from the problems of human life, it had a word for it, the Greek word makarios. And one philosopher says that that word means, makarios, means, quote, the blissful experience of the gods. And of course, that word, makarios, is found in a bunch of ancient Greek texts. And every time those ancient Greek texts are translated into English, the word makarios gets translated as blessed. Blessed. The gods are blessed. They have a blissful experience high up and away from any human toil or suffering. Around the same time, the Greek philosophers were thinking this way. The Jews were writing about who is the kind of person who God keeps from suffering? Who is the kind of person that God blesses? See, they had a different word. And they said, this kind of blessing is available for anyone who lives a virtuous life, for anyone who lives a Proverbs-type life, for anyone who avoids any kind of wrongdoing at all. That person gets an insurance policy against suffering. For the Greeks, the gods were blessed because they were far from the world of humanity, suffering, and decay. For the Jews, a person was blessed if they live virtuously, and then they would avoid suffering. And so into this cultural context, Jesus begins his teaching describing blessed people who don't fit into either of those categories. He says those with internal poverty or poor in spirit, those people are blessed. He says those that are grieving, those that are heartbroken, those that are shattered by loss are blessed. He says the gentle, the quiet, the humble, the submissive, the meek are blessed. He says those who have an unquenchable thirst for things to be made right, those who have an ongoing ache at the way things are, those people are blessed. In other words, Jesus names blessing not as some experience far from the trappings of humanity, but found right in the midst of it. Jesus names blessing not as avoiding suffering, but as something that is somehow encountered right in the thick of it. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. So do you want the blessing of God in your life? Do you want the comfort of God? Then we must allow ourselves to mourn, to grieve, to befriend sorrow, to feel the weight of the world, at least for a moment. Jesus offers us an invitation to grieve. Towards the end of his life, in his last year in prison, Oscar Wilde wrote this. He said, "Where there is sorrow, there is holy ground. Someday you will realize what that means. You will know nothing of life till you do." Jesus says that he has come to give us life and give it to the full. And paradoxically, one of the ways we access that fullness of life is through the gateway of grief. One of the main reasons the strongest reason that I and my family moved back to Chicago in the spring of 2022. In other words, how we discerned God calling us to this community, to this church, was to be closer to my mom. That was a major, major reason. See, I had seen the way she had played with my son, Shepherd, over the last 2 years of his life at that time. And the way that she cherished him, that she was present to him, was incredible. And the way that he delighted in her, the way that he laughed at her cheesy jokes, the way that he'd always ask her to read one more book, and she'd oblige, was powerful to witness. And so I knew I needed them to be close. She was so healthy and full of life, but she was still working at the age of 72. And I knew if I move closer, maybe she'll retire, because I know she wants to do nothing more than spend time with her grandson. So we moved back to Chicago in March of that year. My mom got sick in October of that year, first with bronchitis, so she took some time off work. Then in November, she went back to work, and the day after she went back to work, she fell in the hallway, going from her office to her car. She worked at a hospital, so they were able to get her, and she just stayed in the hospital for a few nights, maybe up to a week. Eventually, she came home. Sarah and Shepherd and I decided, let's go to her place. She lived out in the suburbs for a simple Thanksgiving. We brought food from our house. We had a simple Thanksgiving. She spoke less and had less energy, but it was a good time. We went back to the city that night. The next day, we were shopping for our Christmas tree, and I got a phone call from my aunt who said, Matt, your mom's back in the ER. She called for an ambulance that morning because she was having a hard time breathing. She was in the hospital for some time then, and a week later, it was about a full week, they were able to diagnose her with lung cancer. Her doctor, though, was really hopeful and said, you know what? I bet by mid-January, she's going to be back at work. It was a fairly advanced diagnosis, though. I can't remember exactly, stage 3 or even 4. I was on this quarterly retreat schedule, so I went on my next one in early December, and they had these books about grief, and so my mom was still with us, and I was still hopeful, but I bought this one, Grieving, a Beginner's Guide. It had a simple title, and I knew I needed a simple introduction, so I got that and started reading it. I was visiting Mom a lot after I got back, and I took her to her first chemo and radiation appointment. And at that appointment, she ate a full, big old bowl of soup from Panera. In the coming weeks, it got harder and harder for her to eat. She started losing her voice, and she wasn't talking that much. She wasn't able to walk anymore without a walker. She came to my brother's condo in Ravenswood for Christmas, and she was going to stay there for a little bit. But 2 days after Christmas, she was having a hard time breathing, and she asked us to call an ambulance. They took her to Swedish hospital, and a few days later, just 3 weeks after her diagnosis, she died. And I am not the same person I was before her death. When she died, of course, it was the loss of her life. It was the loss of my mother. But it was also the loss of Sarah and I's dreams and hopes about what life would look like moving back close to her. We were dreaming and planning of ways we could buy a 2-flat where she could live in one floor and we could live in another. maybe we'd be on the first floor and duplex down, have a little more space. We were dreaming that she could finally retire, spend some time with the grandkids. We were dreaming about what it would mean to have family nearby, someone in our lives who wanted to babysit often, who was good at it and saw it as a blessing, not a burden. We were dreaming about what life would be like in this season after coming out of a really hard season. And then it seemed like in a moment that dream was gone. And so was my mom. And I can't tell you the amount of times since Milo, my younger son's birth, since he was born, that I've thought, God, Mom, I wish you were here to see this. I wish you were here to meet him. And there's been moments these past couple years that have been extremely hard. And I find myself whispering, Mom, I need you. I need you. I'm not trying to be gross and bleed all over you right now. I'm just trying to model some of the grief. And I'm not an expert at grief. But I'm trying to learn from it. I'm trying to be present to it. I'm trying to befriend it. And as an introvert, making friends is not easy. It's not fun. It's not natural for me. But Jesus says, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. One of the key images, I have two main images I want to have us meditate on when it comes to think about grief. One of the key ones I want us to look at and think about is a canyon. A canyon. Again, Francis Weller, he says, sorrow carves riverbeds in our soul, deepening us as it flows in and out of our lives. Grief carves into us. Just like this picture of the Grand Canyon, you see the Colorado River over time has made something beautiful and deep. And grief can do this to us as well. It can become a friend that leads us deeper into our own souls, gives us more access to the deepest parts of ourselves. If we choose to, we can lean in and find out what lies beneath. Who am I really? So this is a key image of what grief can do if we allow it. But we can also try to keep it filled. We can try to keep the canyon filled, not allow grief to carve deeper in. And so instead of going into the depths of our lives, we keep ourselves in the shallows. Avoiding grief keeps us insulated from the depths of our own souls. It keeps us strangers to our own selves. I want to name a few things that I think are gap fillers. They try to fill this gap that grief will naturally carve in us if we let it. Gap fillers help us stay numb or avoid grief. Here's a few, right? Addictive substances. They seek to fill the gap. Sometimes the pain and sorrow of our reality feels like too much to face, right? So perhaps we seek another high, another out-of-body experience, another session of numbness with alcohol, another night of binge watching reality TV, another trip to the mall, right? You name it. Addictive substances seek to fill that gap, but so does bad religion. So does bad religion. It's easy to actually cling to religion as a way to avoid grief. It's easy to cling to religion as a way to avoid knowing anything about your soul. If you go through any grief and you end up in a church community or online anywhere, you'll inevitably run into some spiritual platitudes. And while these are given out with good intention, their effect is sort of causing someone to avoid actually facing the thing itself. Right? We all know some of these, like, well, God's in control. They're in a better place. You can name some you can think of. And this kind of religion causes us to avoid facing the pain of our loss. And then we likely end up missing out on what good can actually come from it. There's also spiritual bypassing, which is the same sort of thing. Basically, I prayed about it, so I'm good. I don't need to talk to a therapist about it. I don't need to actually deal with the anger or the rage. But unhealthy politics also loves to fill this gap in our lives. Right? When someone senses fear or anger or grief in someone, unhealthy politics loves to seize the opportunity to divide and conquer us, to weaponize our fear, to teach us to become enemies with people who are different from us. I mean, this is also the category of like, someone please give me a cause to fight for so I don't have to address the sorrow I'm feeling. I go to some protests. It's good to go to some protests. But protests can quickly become a reason or an excuse to not actually deal with the pain you have inside. I mean, give me a demon to fight out there so I don't need to notice the one in here. And then there's cultural or even ancestral lies that we've learned and believed. Right? A simple one, boys don't cry. Boys don't cry. I was told that as a kid, and so I stopped crying. I figured out what I need to do in my face to stop it. Just stop it. Or what about you're too much? That one's often more geared towards women. You're too much. There's, of course, you should be over this by now. That thing happened 5 years ago, or they died 10 years ago. Why are you still talking about it? Or any number of things. Or how about, other people have it worse. This might have been used on you, but more often we use this on ourselves. And other people's suffering can help us with perspective. Like, oh, okay. But comparative suffering is often used as a way to avoid expressing and grieving the loss we're actually feeling. It's used as a way to avoid it rather than to actually get insight into greater problems in the larger world. Like for me, I'm seriously grieving the fact that one of my favorite restaurants in the neighborhood has closed down. Right? And that's a bit silly. But then I think, why am I sad? Their food's not actually that great. But I have these core memories that have began to be made with Shepherd. As a 4-year-old, as a 5-year-old, sitting on these picnic tables. And I wanted to have memories there with him at 7 and 8 and 9 and 10. And so now when we drive past and it's closed, I let him know. I'm so sad this place is closed. I really love the moments we had together here. Or I could, if he said, well, I'm sad too, Dad, Don't you know people are dying across the world? What's wrong with you? You're so selfish. Right? Our place is now gone forever. So that one's, a big one. Other people have it worse. But then there's another one that's like this. If I go there, like if I actually engage in it, the sorrow, if I feel the thing, I'm never going to get out of it. Like I'll never return. I'm just going to sink endlessly into this deep, deep well of sadness. So I'm not going to go there. Do you ever think this way? It makes sense because sorrow, sadness, grief, they're not feel good emotions. So you certainly wouldn't want to get stuck feeling that feeling forever. Like, what if I never feel anything again other than sorrow and loss? To that phrase, if I go there, I'll never return, Francis Weller responds, if you don't go there, you'll never return. He says, quote, we live superficial lives and we feel the gnawing ache of something missing. If we are to return to the richly textured life of soul and to participation with the soul of the world, we must pass through this intense region of grief and sorrow. By going there, we enter into the depths of our humanity. And actually, paradoxically, by going deeper into the sadness, you learn to feel the joy deeper. You learn to feel the beauty and wonder of life even more. But these are all kind of some fillers we've heard to keep the grief from carving into us. But that keeps us from being able to access those deeper parts of ourselves. Again, Francis Weller, he says, it is our unexpressed sorrows, the congested stories of loss that when left unattended block our access to the soul. Do you ever think about congested stories of loss? Shepherd we went to the doctor and they said he's got a mild case of pneumonia. And they gave him some antibiotics. And they said, it'll be better in a few days, but he's probably going to be coughing for a while, like a month or something. They said it's like a traffic jam in there. There's just so much congestion, right? A little gross, but this time of the year, we're all thinking about congestion. Imagine your stories of loss, your moments of grief, if they weren't allowed to get out when they needed to, more in real time. You might have this block, this congestion, that is going to take some real work to start to let out and then have that deeper access within. And for some of us, most of us probably, will need trained companions. We might have really good friends who we can trust, who can handle our grief well. Consider yourself blessed if you do have those friends. Most of us will need therapists. We'll need spiritual directors. Grief work is not easy work. And there may be very valid reasons from your past why you don't want to go there. But remember, you don't have to go alone. You can find trusted, trained companions for the journey. Because the invitation of Jesus should still be ringing in our ears. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. I want that blessing. And I'm sure you do too. Well, remember, this sermon is just an introduction, an invitation to grieve. And there'll be more practical application in the coming weeks, more talking about different kinds of grief, what healing looks like, how we experience it. But for right now, I want to mention two big mistakes we often make when it comes to grief. One is that grief is not something you graduate from. Okay? It's not something you get over. It cannot be fixed, and it does not go away. That's not the lie, that's the truth. Grief does not go away. And that might sound like bad news, but it's not. Grief becomes the way you maintain a relationship with the thing that is lost, or the person. The moment my grief goes away, my relationship with my mother has gone away. Grief is a way in which you remain connected. From this little book, A Beginner's Guide to Grief, which was so helpful to me, her name is Jerusha Hall McCormick. And towards the end of the book, she offers this really, really helpful analogy about this. She says, imagine you have a glass jar. And you're given 3 rubber balls that represent grief. And they're in there, right? So first, you stuff that large ball into the large jar, and it barely fits, right? That's the way recent grief feels to most people. There's no room to maneuver. There's not even room to breathe. Grief has taken over all the available emotional space in your world. There's nothing left over. But then we think the grief starts to shrink. The jar's the same size. The grief starts to shrink. Notice how much more room you have within it. The ball can move around. There's space for other thoughts, other feelings. Then all of a sudden you got this small little ball. The grief is now manageable. It rolls around in the space. Plenty of room for other thoughts, other feelings. And who knows? At this rate, the ball might even shrink some more until it simply disappears. She says this is a helpful model that people take on when someone in their life is grieving. Because we witness them grieving and we see how hard it is. Maybe they can't get out of bed. Maybe they're not able to go to work. Maybe they're crying all the time. And we think, gosh, I can't wait for this grief to shrink and shrink and shrink and eventually go away so I can have them back. So we might even encourage them in that way. Don't worry, time will heal this. The grief will get smaller. It'll go away. But if the grief is their relationship with the thing they lost, that's not actually very comforting. So Jerusha offers a different model. She says, instead of shrinking your grief, what if you thought about growing your world? So she flips it like this, right? Now the glass jars are different sizes. Those are your life. The grief ball remains the same. The ball has not changed its shape or size. The grief is still the same shape and size, but the jar has gotten bigger. Your life, if you're able to process through this grief in healthy ways, will grow and expand. That person, that loss will still remain there, but there'll be so much other life growing around it that it doesn't feel overwhelming. It doesn't feel overpowering. It doesn't feel suffocating. It's just a reality that you live with. You know, children, she says, are said to survive grief much more successfully than older people because their worlds are still obviously still growing. And so they have the loss in their life, but their life is still growing and changing. They're becoming a new person each year. They're going off to school, off to college. They know life continues to expand. But when those of us who are in later stages of life experience grief, we may be tempted to think, this is just it now. It's not going to change. And that leads me to the next point, which is that grief is not despair. In 1 Thessalonians 4:13, Paul says, brothers and sisters, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death, so that you do not grieve like the rest of mankind who have no hope. There's a difference between grief and despair. Despair you could call hopeless grieving. Cole Arthur Riley, in her book, Black Liturgies, she says this in her chapter on lament. She says, "Still, it would be irresponsible for me to guide you into lament without a caution. There's a difference between lament and despair. This distinction is vital. You are so much more than your pain. And the world, for all its terror, is awake with tremendous beauty. We cannot allow sorrow to become any more real to us than the glory of the night sky, the laughter around our kitchen tables. Lament should be an invitation, not an unwelcome guest." She says, "I tell you this because there are forms for sadness that survive in the mouth of despair, a kind of sadness that does not want you well, because it cares more for its own survival than yours. Do not let grief become a locked door. You must carefully and slowly allow others to enter." Despair is that sort of dark mantra that says, things will never change. When we start repeating in our heads, things will never get better. This is as good as it gets, so I better adjust for it. It's hopelessness. We all feel that from time to time. I think that's okay. But it's not a place to pitch our tent. If we find ourselves in despair, in hopelessness, we must ask for help to get out. Ask for help. See, grief and gratitude can actually exist at the same time. But despair is a jealous lover that refuses to share your heart with anyone else. So, let me be clear. I'm inviting you to grieve. I'm encouraging you to grieve. Enter the gateway into grief, but not despair. I want you to let grief carve into you. Because I want you to have more access to soulful living, to abundant life, to a depth of life with God and others that otherwise was unavailable to you. I'm pastorally pushing you into the discomfort of grief, but not despair. So we must be able to know and name the difference. I want to end with a final quote, again by Francis Weller. And then I want to give you a couple options for breath prayers from Cole Arthur Riley as you're invited into grief this Lenten season. Weller says this so well, as is his name. He says, "I am an advocate for grief. I see the many ways it gifts us. While it is difficult to embrace grief and be moved by its muscular demands," again, this is not easy. "Without it, we would not know the heartening quality of compassion. We could not experience the full breadth of love, the surprise of joy. We could not celebrate the sheer beauty of the world." He says, grief fosters each of these capabilities, deepening them by bringing gravity to the moment. He says, grief is the dark color that adds depth to the canvas, providing contrast and texture. Without these tones, our lives would be flat and uninteresting. This necessary encounter, in turn, enables these vital qualities to hold us in times of loss and sorrow. He says, I'm not suggesting that we live a life preoccupied with sorrow. I am saying that our refusal to welcome the sorrows that come to us Our inability to move through these experiences with true presence and conscious awareness condemns us to a life shadowed by grief. By avoiding grief, there's always grief. But it's a little more hidden. He says, welcoming everything that comes to us is the challenge. This is the secret to being fully alive. Friends, I am so excited for us to step into what's next for us as a church. To relaunch as something good and beautiful and new. I'm not saying we're not good and beautiful now, okay? But to step into that reality. I believe that something fresh and deeply needed is growing within us even now. But if we will not face our grief head on, we will have all the same problems with a new logo. We'll have a new name with the same sins. So this Lent, let's do the hard but rewarding work of befriending our grief and becoming fully alive. You already know what's at the end of Lent. It's resurrection. So let's befriend our griefs and become fully alive for the glory of God and the good of our neighborhood. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Amen. I want to leave you with these breath prayers offered by Cole Arthur Riley. And I just want to give you a moment with them. The way you do this, I mean, you could go through all of them if you want, but I think it's helpful to just pick one. They're like, you know what? I'm going to let that become mine for this season of Lent. And you simply breathe in and say the first line, how long, O Lord? This is too much to hold. Maybe that needs to be your breath prayer of grief for this season. Like the psalmist, how long, O Lord? And just admit to God, this is too much to hold. I can't hold all this. Or maybe it'd be really important for you to breathe in and say, I'm not okay. That's a good place to start, especially if you've been told you can't think that. Certainly can't tell God that. I'm not okay. But God, with you I'm safe. And you let yourself pray that in your breath till it starts even incrementally to become more real to you. Or maybe you need to remind yourself, I don't have to hold every pain at once. And you know what? I can feel and not be consumed. This sorrow will not drown me. It's just a wave, and like every wave, it peaks and it goes down again. Or, I won't rush my grief. These tears are sacred. The Psalms have beautiful lines about our tears. Psalm 126 talks about how the tears that fall into the ground feed the soil for new things to be born. It talks about wheat and reaping all this wheat, these bundles of wheat, because our tears fed the soil. Or in another psalm, it says, God basically collects our tears in these little jars. They're that meaningful to him. So any of these might be helpful for you, or all of them. They're only $1.99 each, so pick the one that's the most. Oh, sorry. See, I'm still learning about grief. When it gets too heavy, I got to cut through it with some sort of humor. Friends, take one of these, hold it with you, carry it in your heart. Let it be your prayer. And now